مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. أنا مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. 12 شهرا المنقضية كانت بالتأكيد مليئة بالأحداث، من حرب في أوكرانيا إلى إصلاحات للشرطة في أمريكا، ومن تضخم هائل إلى حرب سياسية بين حزبي أمريكا الأساسيين وفي داخلهما. لقد غطينا عشرات من التقارير المختلفة. هنا في هذا البرنامج نحن لسنا يمينيين أو يساريين، لا ليبراليين ولا محافظين، لا جمهوريين ولا ديمقراطيين، وكما ستظهر هذه المقتطفات نحن أحرار منفتحون على الجميع. Joining us is Norman Ornstein. Norm is Emeritus Scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and one of America's wisest experts on politics, Congress, and the presidency. A native of the state of Minnesota, also in the middle of America, he is a contributing editor and columnist for National Journal and The Atlantic, and an election analyst for BBC News. Norm, Afghanistan, inflation, inability to get Build Back Better through Congress. The last 4 months have not been Joe Biden's finest hour.
No, there's no doubt that Biden has hit a rocky period. I do think that the withdrawal from Afghanistan that hit right at the competency of the president was a big blow. The reality, of course, otherwise is that they did a dramatic job of withdrawing people in a very short period of time. But nobody has focused on that and probably won't. I'm not sure that Afghanistan as an issue will be a big one going forward, but it helped to shape an image of that president. And I think we also have to come back to COVID. The Delta variant as it emerged is a major part of the unease and unhappiness that Americans feel. 2 years of shutdowns, of uncertainty and turmoil. And when people thought we were finally coming out of it, at the same time, we did get one more piece of legislative accomplishment that was a pretty significant one, $1 trillion in the only bipartisan thing that we've seen done, the bipartisan infrastructure plan. We will have a quite remarkable set of achievements that might not translate into substantial approval or popularity for the president. And then, of course, the supply chain issues that were driven by COVID worldwide that have meant an increase in demand as the economy itself began to pick up, but a shortage of supply from oil to all kinds of other goods has led to that inflation. And all of that has meant that Biden is underwater in terms of approval. Can he pull his Democrats together? Can he, at the same time, find ways to get the votes to counter what is a continuing insurgency? We cannot get away from the reality that January 6th wasn't a one-shot deal. States are now trying to find ways, Republicans in states, to make sure that they win elections even if they lose those elections.
Also joining us is Kyle Kondik. Kyle is managing editor of Sabato's Crystal Ball at the University of Virginia's Center for Politics, and he is the author of The Bellwether, a book about Ohio's presidential voting history. All right, let's turn for a minute, Kyle, to the House, and I just want to ask you about the squad, this quartet of progressive women congresspeople that have gotten a lot of celebrity, even if their numbers are don't match the celebrity that they have received in the broader Democratic caucus. Are any of them vulnerable in 2022?
They all should be okay. There is redistricting, of course, to sort of change the district lines for some of these members, and so that can sometimes lead to some instability. Rashida Tlaib from the Detroit area in Michigan, she may or may not have some primary trouble. I guess we'll have to sort of wait and see on that. That's a bit later of a primary. But what ends up happening typically in these sort of wave elections, if in fact this does turn into a Republican wave election, is that the people on the wrong side of the wave who end up losing are generally the more moderate members, because in both parties, really, because the moderate members generally occupy the more competitive seats. And the more competitive seats are the ones that are likeliest to flip. So what could end up happening is, let's say, the Republicans net something like 30 seats or something, which I think is possible, not guaranteed, but possible. Maybe that actually, sort of increases the influence of the more kind of progressive members in the Democratic House caucus, simply because there are fewer Democrats there. So that, I think that's sort of a dynamic to watch. And then some of the folks who are more centrist, Abigail Spanberger, Alyssa Slotkin, several others, those members occupy really vulnerable seats and could end up losing in a wave scenario. Also, just one other, kind of big picture point here is that this very well could be Nancy Pelosi's last term as the leader of the Democratic caucus. She is running for re-election, but maybe she'll, decide to resign after the election or something like that and move on, particularly if the Democrats lose the House majority. So, you could see some significant changes in the leadership of the Democratic House caucus, both, this upcoming year and then in years to come, because a lot of the leadership right now is on the older side.
My guests today include David M. Drucker. David is the senior political correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Previously, he served as senior editor of CQ Roll Call, an insider newspaper covering Capitol Hill, and as a political reporter for the Los Angeles Daily News, covering politics in his home state of California. David, I want to ask a little bit of a bigger question.
All right.
If Joe Biden is in the low 40s and Donald Trump never really got above the low 40s, is there anybody in America who can sustain on a national level real national support?
Well, look, in our tribal partisan politics of this current era, it's very difficult for American presidents to develop and maintain a broad breadth of support, like the kind that we saw under Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton, and even initially Barack Obama. But I think presidents would do better and give themselves a better chance to do this if they would stop trying to hit grand slam home runs with policy every time they get elected, and try and deal, number one, with the problems Americans are most concerned about, and try and return to this idea of incremental progress that focuses on voters in the middle. You may anger your partisans in your party a little bit, but they'll stick with you. The partisans in the other party are always going to have a problem sticking with you, but the middle will be happy. The opposition will therefore be less inclined to give you too much trouble. And, in your own party, when they see that you're a winner, they're also not going to want to give you too much trouble.
My guests today include Zach Budrick. Zach is the energy and environment reporter for The Hill, newspaper covering Capitol Hill, and he is co-host of Stim for Stim, a relationship podcast for and by people on the autism spectrum. Also joining us is Zoya Tierstein. Zoya is the climate and public health reporter for Grist. She has also reported for The Verge and Haaretz. All right, so let's turn to internal Democratic Party politics. Is there anything that you think the administration could be doing that would excite the base on this set of issues and still retain its focus on trying to bring down gas prices and trying to fight inflation? Either of you.
That's a tough question, Zach. Do you know the answer to that? I mean, I think that if I knew the answer to that, I'd be a hot commodity. I think honestly, this is what energy experts have told me. So they are obviously biased. But they say that by sort of championing a transition to renewable energy as an alternative to fossil fuels, by saying, hey, if we were reliant on wind and solar and other forms of energy, nuclear, hydro, within the US, we wouldn't have to depend on other places for oil and gas. We would be able to sort of like weather any conflict easily because we're going to produce those things domestically. And I think that could be a winning strategy if people really understood renewable energy. But I'm not convinced that would actually get voters turnout. I don't know what the answer is, honestly.
One thing that certainly has taken a hit in over the last year is the concept of energy independence, which was a major focus of some of the arguments of the previous administrations, but now clearly when events in Ukraine and Russia and tight production in the Persian Gulf has an impact on our oil prices. Clearly, the idea of total independence has taken a strong hit. How will that affect the approach of people as they think about our energy strategy and our climate change strategy, looking out into the future?
Zach, you should take this one, I think.
Okay, yeah, I can go ahead. I think that, there's this perception, particularly among Republicans, that energy independence means that specifically we are domestically producing the fossil fuels that we would otherwise depend on people, on regions that might either be involved in conflicts such as the Ukraine-Russia region, or regions that where there are major human rights concerns that we don't want to co-sign, such as the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia. But I think that a lot of renewable advocates, in light of the recent surges in gas prices, have been saying it's more than that. It's that we need to develop energy sources that are not subject to these massive international shocks like oil and gas are.
And do you see any rethinking in the part of the environmental movement, for example, on the issue of nuclear power, which obviously won't affect the near-term price of gas, but would have a long-term impact on the reliance on fossil fuels? Zoya?
That's not really my beat, but I would think that there must be some sort of reckoning among environmentalists on the topic of nuclear energy. Nuclear power is a reliable and stable source of baseload power that I think that many environmentalists are realizing the US would be foolish to overlook. This is an issue that's been sort of happening and replicating all across, like Europe, for example. A lot of countries have been shuttering nuclear plants, and there's a reason for that. I mean, there's been these massive meltdowns that stick with people in a really real way, and those are not to be overlooked. But there's new nuclear technology that is a lot smaller and a lot easier to manage, that could potentially solve some of those energy concerns that the U.S. and other countries have. So I think nuclear is an important part of the conversation. I would like to report more on it. I'm not sure that the environmentalists are really thinking seriously about it, though, right now. And I would like to say, however, that there are some Republicans who have climate plans, and they've talked about them before Biden came into office. And I will be watching that, but I'm not convinced that anything will actually happen on that front.
It's a sign of the times. With Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the growing recognition of China as the great challenge of the 21st century, pundits have decreed the end of the post-9/11 era. And Broadway evidently has done the same, with the announcement that one of the most powerful and heartwarming shows to hit the Great White Way in years is about to close. Come From Away. With an ensemble cast of actors all playing multiple roles, this is the gripping, emotional, often funny, and deeply touching story of what happened in the town of Gander on the island of Newfoundland off Canada's North Atlantic coast, when American airspace closed that fateful day and dozens of airliners with more than 10,000 passengers from around the world were diverted to a huge but little-used airport that was a relic of the Cold War. How the people of Gander responded and how the passengers dealt with the unknown produced a musical that will leave you feeling good about humanity, which is remarkable given that it was triggered by the horrors that humanity could produce. If you get a chance to see it, and I've seen it 3 times, please go. And if you can't, watch it online. You will feel better for it. My guests today include Ernie Suggs. Ernie has reported for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, one of America's finest local newspapers, for the past 24 years. A native of Brooklyn, New York, Ernie serves on the advisory board of the Harvard Nieman Fellowships. Also joining us is David Hawkins. David is senior editor of The American Leader, a nonprofit taking on America's biggest systemic problems. He was also the founding editor of the Fulcrum.com and spent 2 decades as senior editor at CQ and Roll Call, 2 must-read news sites covering Capitol Hill. So, gentlemen, in 2022, what, in your view, are the most important international issues that Americans care about? David?
Well, I think probably the most important thing they care about is it will be whether the new varieties of the coronavirus come from other countries. That's probably, to be honest, the first way that most Americans will engage with what's going on, as you say, across the 2 oceans or across our southern or northern border. Americans tend to be pretty myopic when it comes to this, as you just said. So I would say it's not the 2 things that the politicians in Washington are talking about, which of course would be Russia and China. It's about how can bad things from other countries affect their lives, and the easiest and the most obvious bad thing would be the coronavirus.
And Ernie, do you agree with that? If you had to ask Americans, what about the world you care most, would it be COVID?
Yeah. I like David's phrasing, what are the bad things that we can keep from coming to America? And I think that the main thing is the coronavirus. And I think that the main thing that we're concerned about right now is stemming the tide of the coronavirus coming to America. That's what we're all talking about. And that kind of always also kind of seeps over to our immigration policies, our foreign policies, and all that kind of stuff. But it's all about, it's all about keeping us safe in whatever form we look at that, in whatever form we see.
My guests today include Ariel Cohen. Ariel is healthcare reporter for CQ Roll Call, a must-read website and newspaper covering Capitol Hill politics and policy. Her primary focus has been covering Washington's COVID response and the battle over vaccines. How is it that America, unlike other countries of the world, has these little paper vax cards that anybody can write with an ink pen, whatever claim of vaccination they want? Is there a rationale to have a national vaccine database that really records whether or not Americans truly got vaccinated? Is there a political obstacle? Now it's probably too late, of course. But is there a way to fix this, or are we going down this road and there's no way back?
Well, this was a conversation that politicians and public policy officials had maybe a few months after the vaccination efforts started. So when would that be? Early 2021. But at that point, they even said it was too late. A lot of, and now, of course, it would be very retroactive to do. Some states and hospital systems have their own databases, and you'll see some major cities, such as New York City, have databases and apps to show your vaccination status. But at this point, a national database, it's not something we're going to see. So hold on to those little cards, put them in a plastic case, make sure they're safe, because it's what we got.
Our guests again today include Steve Clemons. Steve is editor-at-large for The Hill, a website and newspaper focused on U.S. politics, Congress, and Capitol Hill. He is also senior fellow and founder of the American Strategy Program at the New American Foundation, a prominent Washington think tank. Also joining us is Todd Gilman. Todd is Washington bureau chief of the Dallas Morning News, one of our nation's best local newspapers. He is past president of the Regional Reporters Association, and he serves on the board of the White House Correspondents Association. Todd, when you think about where the Democratic Party will be on the come next autumn, when we're gearing up for the November elections, does it move to the left from where it is now, or does it stay more or less in the center? More Joe Biden-y, more Nancy Pelosi? Which do you think is going to be the tide in the run up to the election?
Well, that is a difficult question. That has been the tension within the party for a long time on the issue of pragmatism. In their hearts, they're all very liberal. They all want to have the Green New Deal, but they know that will antagonize suburban moderate voters and scare them. And it's not even so much the ideological tension that is important in the Democratic Party about who's right, whether we should go very, very far left or just very left. It's more the assessment of how far left we can go without guaranteeing that we're going to lose.
Is this going to motivate Democrats?
The Supreme Court is now 6-3 conservative because Donald Trump put 3 conservatives on the court. He had the opportunity to just absolutely transform the politics of the Supreme Court in a way that might deliver the biggest goal of conservatives for decades, which is finally getting rid of legalized nationally legal abortion. Kicking it back to the states, most states will keep it illegal. I'm going too far into the weeds, but the bottom line is it is going to dominate the November elections. It is going to be a cultural turning point that energizes young liberal voters, women, but it is also going to make all of the Republicans and conservatives say, that is why we elected Donald Trump. No matter what else you think about him, he gave us exactly what we wanted.
But you have to understand that Republicans' singular focus for decades has been to get conservative justices into the legal system and to dominate the Supreme Court. And as Todd just said, they have won that. And now these key decisions from the past are coming in. And the Democrats have been about, a tapestry of different causes. And one of the really interesting challenges, the Democrats, in my view, have been asleep at the switch with the consequences of what would happen with the Supreme Court shifting as it did. And I think that will wake up a lot of Democrats and say, what have we done? It will turn them out. And on top of that, a lot of them are going to be ticked off, angry that because of voting rights and a lot of the liberalization of opportunities to vote because of COVID in the last election and the efforts by many Republican legislatures and governors to close down some of those pathways, I think the White House, which pretends to be supportive of voting rights, is actually hoping that loses too, so that not only do you have the reaction on abortion politics, as Todd just said, but you also have people angry. Why are they trying to take my vote away? And that results in an anger and a passion and a turnout that may prevent the House and Senate from turning Republican, as would normally happen at this time. So I think they're counting on that reaction, actually. I think Joe Biden's team is hoping. They're so frustrated and ticked off that they will come to the polls.
All right, so gentlemen, we're about to run out of time, so just 2-word answers. Who controls Congress at the end of 2022? Steve?
I think the Republicans will.
Both houses?
Yes.
Todd?
I agree. Yes, Republicans will.
You heard it here first. Elections. Republicans controlling both houses of Congress at the end of 2022. So if you really liked our national deadlock, you're going to love it at the end of the year. Todd Gilman, Steve Clemons, thank you so much for joining us in setting the agenda for the year 2022. وصلنا إلى ختام هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إن كان لديكم أسئلة أو تعليقات حول البرنامج أو حول اتجاه السياسات الأميركية على مدى العام المنصرم، تواصلوا معي رجاء عبر تويتر على هاشتاج Inside Washington أو تراسلوني مباشرة على الرابط @RobSatloff. إلى اللقاء في الأسبوع القادم. حتى ذلك الحين شكرا وإلى اللقاء.